We've got Georgia, Texas this Saturday. It's the primetime game on ABC. It's out in Austin. It's a conference game. It's awesome. Everyone's ready for it. We've had it circled all year. So I looked at it the other day. I drew a little bit of heat, maybe moderate heat, for basically committing the sin of repeating Kirby Smart. Kirby looked at Texas's defense and said, they remind me of better versions of ourself, which indicated two things to me. Number one, Georgia's got all the critical traits that those great Georgia defenses have had. And then number two, it sounded like Kirby's telling you we kind of don't have that kind of defense ourselves this year. A lot of that's due to injury. A lot of that's due to attrition. Guys get drafted because they're too good, stuff like that. So I looked at the game and I thought to myself, okay, there are a couple of things I've been able to rely on with Georgia. They're usually dependable on the ground. They're 92nd in that category this year, and also limiting chunk plays through the air. They're usually top 25 there. They're 68th right now. So a couple of the aspects that I used to be able to count on with Georgia, period, much less to travel on the road, those aren't there. That doesn't mean you lose the football game, because we could poke holes in pretty much every resume out there right now, but I think it's a Carson Beck game, man. It's got to be a Carson Beck game. I think as much as I think Texas is the better team, strangely, when I started to break the thing down, a lot of it centered on Georgia, because if Texas is Texas, I feel good about them. There's a lot I think that Georgia has to do. I don't know, maybe above and beyond what I've seen so far from them this year. I've looked at that thing all week. You've looked at it, but I think you ISO'd maybe a little bit different angle than I've heard anyone else talk about. So share with the entire world right here how you see this Georgia-Texas game.
Well, first, I thought you were going to go with something you took heat for this week was going to be saying that Texas is the new Georgia. Was that a real quote of yours?
Well, it was a quote on a thumbnail. I won't go as far as to say it was an actual quote. I did say that this year's Texas team looks more like Georgia than this Georgia team looks like past versions of Georgia. All the stuff that Georgia normally brings to the table, I think this Texas team brings, and I will not apologize for that because it's true.
Okay. But to be this Georgia now, you need a couple championships in recent memory. So that will be the only outlier that I feel like you maybe forgot there, but that's okay. Similar to me throwing out the statistics that all of Georgia's game played against the AP number one team have been at neutral sites, and saying, well, when you're just always the number one team, you can't play that game at home, which it's 127 years of football. So it's not exactly been that way always, but nonetheless, here's what I think Georgia has to do defensively. I'm going to reference these as detachments. I don't really have a technical football term that's utilized to group all of this together. But one thing that Sark does extremely well is he gets you looking one way and he hits you the other way. And that can be with certain run plays. It can be with motions. But where he's masterful is that bringing people close to the football, so bringing people in the tackle box essentially, and then utilizing that person quickly through the air the other direction. So a receiver into the backfield, back out of the backfield, run play fake to the left, hit him back the opposite way. Tight end looks like he's staying in the block. We're going to run fake counter to the left. He leaks out to the right. Receiver comes in, looks like he's going to stay in the backfield, and then they hit him out. With run fakes and motions, all this, he gives you all the eye candy to take the majority of your attention away, Josh, but then it's someone who was attached to the line of scrimmage or attached to that tackle box that's going to leave and be somewhere else. If you watch the Oklahoma game, Gunnar Helm was big with this. A couple of times backs out of the backfield. Go to that Michigan game, and there were a couple of running backs out of the backfield that were quickly hit. Extensions of the run game, but detached from the tackle box. Georgia just plain and simple has to be aware that that can happen, and they must defend that because it's stealing. It's free grass, as Roman Harper would call it, and you can't give teams those kind of yards in a game like this. You have to make them work. Texas is an explosive play football team, and if they're doing that with that high percentage of throws, similar to what Quinn did last week, you're making life too easy on them. On the other side, I think it's really simple. I agree with a lot of what you said about this being a Carson Beck game. I would say, not to say that it's not going to be a Carson Beck game, but a Trevor Etienne game, because when you see what he did against Auburn late when he had the opportunity, and that wasn't 4 quarters of it, and then what he did a little bit last week against Mississippi State, the dynamic nature of what he's able to do is starting to come out. It just hasn't been consistent as we're going to give this guy the ball 35 times a game. but he's an explosive play waiting to happen. And I think it's through the air, handing it to him. They need a little more balance. They cannot continue to get away from being just this drop back football team because the tackles have not been great in pass protection. And against this team, that'll be a big problem. Colin Simmons can get to the quarterback. Baron Sherrill can move outside and get to the quarterback. Ethan Burke can move outside and get to the quarterback. They'll even take Anthony Hill Jr., line him up outside, rush him. He's got plenty of pop to be able to live out there and rush the quarterback. You cannot live against this defense if you can't protect your quarterback on the edges, and Texas can attack you there. Now, Texas might not be great in the secondary. It looks like they're much better, but we don't really know. I mean, Michigan's offense, Mississippi State, first start for a freshman quarterback. I mean, they've played some teams whose passing offenses are not great. So we'll see if Georgia can protect enough to then test that. And then if that Texas secondary is not a whole lot better, I agree with you then. That's where Georgia probably has a chance to go win this football game.
Well, that's the path. If we're sitting there, the dust settles late Saturday night and they won, you and I were doing some recap show. What we're probably saying is, wow, Texas came in with, I think, the number 2 rated pass defense in the country, but they hadn't even faced like a top 50 caliber quarterback. So much like when Georgia faced Bama and they hadn't allowed a touchdown, and then the first 4 drives were touchdowns, we found out a little bit of it was a mirage based on schedule having been played. The second thing would be, remember that Washington game when Texas played Washington in the semifinal last year, and remember how they had to play catch up. Like that was a Washington team that put them in a lot of conflict in terms of having to play catch up. And that was when errors started to happen. And the other thing was, I remember watching that and feeling like, I don't know, Ewers, he's good, doesn't feel like himself. And I look at, then you fast forward to this year and I look at this game, there's a lot of weaponry that they can use. They go very deep in guys that can catch the football. I had this written down. They got 6 pass catchers with a catch of 40-plus yards this year. They got 7 players with a rush of 20-plus yards this year. So there's a lot of weaponry there. So as Meemaw would say, you got 13 holes in the dam. You can either choose to use your 10 fingers to try and plug it, and no bueno, or you can just get to the water source. So I ask you, that would be the quarterback in this case, how effective can Georgia be at getting to the quarterback, affecting the quarterback, where a lot of that other stuff doesn't come into play so much?
I think they can be effective getting there. The problem is are Sark and Quinn Ewers going to give them the opportunity to? Because the ball gets out so quick. We had a production meeting on Sunday, and this kind of goes back to some of the other things we talked about last week and fans just not appreciating wins in this day and age. And the first thing that a guy on our crew brought up, he said, well, you know, Quinn Ewers only completed 1 pass over 5 yards in the game. I said, give us 34-3 rivalry game. What are we talking about? Like, what are we picking apart here? I just think with the nature of how he gets rid of the football, it's going to be tough to get there. And then you got to deal with 2 really good offensive tackles. I mean, Kelvin Banks is going to go in the first round. And I think you can make an argument that Cam Williams is one of the most improved offensive linemen in the SEC. So you got Jake Majors that runs the show up there at center. Like, they're not going to turn a lot of guys free. So you're going to have to earn it. And that's where it's going to be difficult and how often are you going to run into being close, getting there, almost there? And that's what Carson Beck's been great at, because when you tell people the Georgia tackles haven't been great, they'll throw the sack numbers at you. And it's no, that's not the problem. The problem is when you forecast ahead and look at how they've operated, it could be very problematic. So I don't even know if it's about just getting those wins, Josh. It's about finding a way to confuse Quinn Ewers to where the quick game can't live anymore. Then you're going to have to find a way to probably get some one-on-ones at the quarterback. And it's going to be tough. Georgia got a couple guys that can do it. It's just a matter of putting Texas in the situations where they have to attempt those elongated drops that they have the opportunity to get to the quarterback.